Hello, everybody. I think we should get started. We slipped 10 minutes from our plan, which is good in the grand scheme of things. Welcome back, everybody. And it's my great pleasure to introduce this next panel, which follows beautifully from the last. There was a call for a harmonization, a convergence, a discussion amongst the various organizations that have been working so hard and so well on the topic of framework and policy for neurotechnology regulation. And we have today, we're grateful to have four leading thinkers and representatives of four groups that have been working actively in this area to speak on a panel. And we intend to keep this quite informal. There's going to be short remarks from each of the participants, followed by a discussion. And we'll hope that you will join in on the discussion. We'll do something like we did with the last panel. Christophe this time will run around with a microphone so that everybody can participate. So the format is to have brief remarks from each of the speakers. Let me introduce them. We'll start with David Winikoff, who's to my immediate left, who is the head of the Secretariat of the Working Party on Bio, Nano, and Converging Technology, the OECD. We'll then move to Tim Engelhardt, who's at the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, followed by Laurence Boeuf, who is Secretary of the Steering Committee for Human Rights in Biomedicine and Health at the Council of Europe, and then Hervé Schneeweiss, who's at CNRS Paris and is, he was mentioning earlier, chair or former chair of the Bioethics Committee of UNESCO and has been since 2019, and is the recent co-chair of the recent UNESCO work on neurotechnology policy. So let me turn it over to David to kick it off.
Great. I guess I'll say a little bit about the OECD and what we've done in the area. Let me thank the organizers for putting together the panel and this great conference. The OECD is a 38-member organization, it's an international organization. And we like to say that we try to create better lives. And the idea is to work across a range of policy areas. People think of it as just economic policy, but this involves work on employment, on environment, and for me, science, technology, and innovation. The idea, again, is that this is a forum for convening, not just countries, but also business and other stakeholders to work collectively on key policy issues of the time. It's an organization that produces analytical work and reports, often data-based, quantitative data, but also qualitative studies. And I guess relevant to this group is the activity in the development of international standards and international, which we call recommendations. And recommendations are soft law, as we've just heard. They don't have legal force, but moral and political force. They can be adhered to not just by member states of the OECD, but also non-member adherents. In this regard, the organization and the membership developed a recommendation for responsible innovation in neurotechnology in 2019, which was the first international standard on the ethics and responsible innovation of neurotechnology. This is pointedly aimed to, I think, balance the innovation impulse with the very real need to protect rights and interests of participants around the innovation process in neurotechnology. I'll leave it there, and maybe we can come back around and dig down further.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for the nice introduction, for the invitation, and also thanks for great first session. So we're really glad to listen to it, although it added more points I wanted to raise, so I may be even more confused now what I'm going to say. So I'm at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, working on a range of technology-related issues, and neurotech is among them. And I thought I give you a quick overview because so often we can, in the first hour, the Human Rights Council came up, our office came up, the advisory committee came up, and rather than just speaking about us, what we're doing, I think I will include a slightly broader perspective here. And many of you will know it, but I think it might be useful to just give a very broad overview or very rough overview. So there's the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, which is part of the UN Secretariat. So we are kind of part of the core United Nations. The High Commissioner is the head of our office, and we speak with his voice. Then we have the Human Rights Council, which is also based here in Geneva, and as Milena pointed out, is an intergovernmental body where governments negotiate their positions and exchange views, etc., etc. We support them as a secretariat, but it's not our voice. Then the Human Rights Council has also special procedures, which are special rapporteurs and working groups, which are independent. So what they say is their opinion based on their interpretation of the law, and they're very influential and can really help pushing forward the human rights thinking. And then we have treaty bodies which interpret and monitor the application of specific human rights treaties. Just to keep it in mind, and for all of them, we provide secretariat services, staff working for them, but the output is theirs. For example, the advisory committee, it's fully their report, and Milena and her colleagues wrote it. So I will not take any ownership for that, but I really want to congratulate you on the excellent report. So I hope that wasn't too boring, but even people working within the UN are often confused about this whole thing, and I thought maybe that's helpful. So our mandate is, roughly speaking, to promote human rights, all human rights. Civil political rights, economics rights, social cultural rights, right to development, rights of persons with disabilities, etc., etc. So it's a very broad mandate, and it's global. So it's extremely broad. We support governments, we give advice, we call out abuses, we monitor the situation. We are a forum for collecting information, informing information. We really try hard to be very open to stakeholders, to have a strong multi-stakeholder approach. We mainstream human rights within the UN system. We try to achieve some level of coordination here. Coordination came up in other contexts today. We engage with victims, etc. States as the primary duty bearers under human rights law, of course, our main addressees of the work, but we work a lot and increasingly with businesses on how they can implement their responsibilities for respect for human rights as laid down in the guiding principles for business and human rights. What I think is really important when we speak about the neurotechnology part is all this cross-cutting dimension of the work and our scope, because we had just a little exchange before the session on how neurotechnology impacts various people, various groups, various areas. You brought up work, we heard about health, etc. And we have experts working on work, on health, on indigenous peoples. We have around 90 field offices, field presences, not offices, sometimes it's unfortunately just one person around the world. So the reach is pretty big, and it situates as well, but it also makes it very, very hard to have the resources to do everything all the time. So more specifically on work we've been doing, I would like to highlight in that context the Secretary General, a couple of years already in the Global Compact report, Common Agenda report, highlighted neurotechnology as one of the issues to really look into and develop the human rights angle of it. Internally within the UN, we have coordinated on that and exchanged views, in particular with UNESCO. I work on the right to privacy over the years. Now in the context of AI is extremely relevant, I would say. We have developed for the UN system human rights due diligence guidance for the context of new and emerging technologies that guides UN organizations in how to deal with technology issues. And it has been mentioned before, our BTEC project zooms in on the application of the UN guiding principles on business and human rights on technology issues. I'll leave it at that for the moment. No, let me just, sorry, I'm monopolizing. That's one of the things I wanted to respond to because it was raised in the first session. The advisory services. It's a natural extension of what we are already doing. It's how I would frame it. And it has, the Secretary General recommended something like that in the Common Agenda report as well. It is now reflected also in the Global Digital Compact that was adopted by member states last month. And we presented a report to the Human Rights Council in June, where we mapped the entire work of the UN human rights system relating to technology. Terrible work to do because there's far more than you would think. And every day you discover more. But one of the gaps we saw, despite our efforts, is concrete guidance and concrete situations on the concrete application of human rights to specific scenarios in specific contexts. We have extremely capable people working in special procedures, for example, where so much is being developed, but where no capacity for doing that is there. And us with our network, with our reach, we really want to emphasize in the future this kind of work with the help of experts, but also with internal capacity. So just to clarify that, to take on this little aspect, and now I leave it to you. Sorry, that was longer than I thought.
Thank you very much. So I'm sorry for my voice. That's the virus and bacteria sessions as well, period. So yes, to give you a bit of an introduction on the Council of Europe, this is the oldest European organization, intergovernmental organization. We have 46 member states, and the main mission is the protection of human rights, democracy, and rule of law. And we do this, when I say we, it's the Council of Europe does this through the development of international legal standards, which could be legally binding, as this is the case for the Convention on Human Rights and Biomedicine, referred to in the report, the UN report on neurotechnology and human rights. Or another example, most recent, the Convention on Artificial Intelligence that was adopted in the spring this year. And we also develop non-legally binding instruments as recommendations. The other aspect of the work is to support member states, because it's actually an achievement to agree on international legal instruments, but if it's to put it on the shelf, it has very limited impact. So what we want is to help member states to implement. So we do that through different tools, to cooperation activities, but we do also monitor the development and the implementation of those principles to eventually address violations, namely through the European Court of Human Rights. So the protection of human rights is really the main point of entry for the work of the Council of Europe in relation to neurotechnologies. And two intergovernmental committees are actually having neurotechnology on their agendas with, again, this perspective of human rights protection. That is the Steering Committee for Human Rights in the field of health and biomedicines, which is responsible also for the Convention on Human Rights and Biomedicines. And the other committee is the committee responsible for data protection. So they are looking at this from a more privacy perspective. There are common elements in these works when it comes to expertise in particular, but I'll come back on this. I will focus more on the work of the Steering Committee for Human Rights and Biomedicines, which acronym is CDBio. And this work was undertaken in the context of a strategic action plan on human rights and technologies in biomedicines, which still run until the end of next year. We're now preparing a new strategic action plan. And these topics was including under the objective of improving the governance of technologies, with the acknowledgement of the needs for a new governance framework to optimize the chances of stimulating innovation that contributes to human flourishing, whilst minimizing applications that have negative consequences for individuals and societies. And those governance models needs to guarantee, and that's an essential element in this action undertaken under this governance pillar, guarantee that human rights are a guiding consideration throughout the entire process, that is research, development, and application. And furthermore, that it should be accompanied by an ongoing dialogue with the society. So the first step in the work on neurotechnology for the CDBio was to organize jointly with the OECD in November 2021 a roundtable on neurotechnology and human rights framework. And the question was, do we need new rights? So the basis for this roundtable was the OECD recommendations, as well as an expert study prepared by Marcelo Janca. And it's my pleasure also to mention that Hervé Geneva is one of the rapporteurs for this roundtable. So you see we have, can I call them the usual suspect in this context? And I think our coordinations to ensure complementarity, which I think is also something on which we need to come back. So now I think I stop there to then go on the outcome of this roundtable and follow-up work we're doing in the next questions.
Okay.
Hervé?
Thank you. So, as you heard, I'm one of the usual suspects. And it's a great pleasure. Thank you for the organizer for the invitation. So to be clear, I have two main activities. The main one is that I am a neurologist in the hospital. I am a practitioner. And I am the head of the neuroscience department at Sorbonne University. This is my real paid job. And then I have the chance to be involved in ethics activity. I chair the INSERM Ethics Committee for years, and more connected to neurotechnology. I'm now the chair of the Ethics and Society Committee of eBrains, which is a follow-up of the HBP Human Brain Project. And here you are at the headquarters of the former HBP project. So to continue with what was said, I will give you two examples of this kind of regulation. An expert like me, but you will have many of them in the audience, including Marcello, but Olivia also, Milena participated. We have also some others. One is from the work we have done with OECD, and you know the recommendations 4757 of 2019. So it's wonderful. You have 9 principles, and now what are you going to do? And OECD was asking for implementation. And in France, what we did was to propose a charter. But this charter was from the principles initiated by the French government, but with the mission to be inclusive and gathering the whole actors. All actors means the academics, but also the patient associations, but also the industry, but also the research organizations, all the possible actors. And this charter was, how are we going to apply the 9 principles of the declaration? I have no time, and the charter is available in French and English. You can find it, but this is a kind of thing. One, to protect personal brain data by committing to provide patients and users with clear, accessible, and rigorous information on the collection, processing, and use of personal brain data, as well as on the storage, dissemination, and sharing of such data. And this is the perfect articulation between basic works that we have done, particularly with Marcello, and groups, and we are continuing to do so at EBI, the International Brain Initiative Neuroethics, to try to characterize what are brain data and what kind of engagement the various actors of the field can take to protect human rights by taking concrete actions. And now we have 38 signatories of the charter in France, of all the sectors, including big pharma like Sanofi, including small startups in the field of neurotechnologies. And it's turning to a European charter with the European Brain Council and European Neurological Association, Neurological Psychiatric Association, and so on and so far, gathering. And in the next weeks, you will see that it will turn to be an inclusive European charter to try to move to the real ground and implement. So next, I will turn to UNESCO. As already said, a landmark was the IBC report of 2021 on the ethical challenges of neurotechnologies. And I want to say, most likely because I'm a neurologist, that the main challenge is to answer unmet needs. Neurological and psychiatric disorders represent 1/3 of our health expenses. It's massive. It's billions of people suffering from neurological and mental disorders. And in some cases, it was already the case for more than 30 years for Parkinson's disease, and I had the chance to be in a department that developed the implants at the first stages. Neurotechnology are the solution for some of these disorders. So unmet need is, to answer this unmet needs, is a basic fundamental human right, the right to access to a better health, but better education, better life. In the draft of the recommendations that the expert groups, because UNESCO decided to move to our recommendation, that was to make a recommendation. So the governments, the states decided that. So an expert group was designed, 24 people coming from anywhere in the world. The draft of the recommendation is online, in English, in French. States are called to comment until the 31st of December. So please read, please comment, either send it directly, but more importantly, send it through your state representative. And what I want to emphasize before we move to the next, that in this recommendation, we tried to consider the neurotechnology from a holistic point of view, meaning the whole life cycle, considering from where are coming the materials, what kind of energy cost, because you are including a lot of artificial intelligence, what kind of various use. So what kind of holistic, and on the other way, what kind of inclusivity to try to, at the whole stage of life, for children, for adolescents, for elderly. And finally, what kind of context. And we tried to stick to the human rights wordings, New York Conventions on Children's Rights, which is something of extreme importance, but extreme novelty. For if I just take this example, and I will stop here. The Convention for Children say you need to ask the consent as much as possible of the children. But the legal guarant of the children are the parents. And you have many aspects. You have the medical field. what will happen with the data or with the consent when the children is no more, become an adult? Is it possible to reuse this data or not? What kind of consent? But it's also when you are going to use in education, what kind of proof you need. It could be very helpful for dyscalculia, dyslexia, to help personal education, but it could be also to try to make standard brains with a format. So what kind of protection you need? So all these technologies need to use the real things that are already written, for example, in the Convention for Children's Rights or Convention for people with disabilities, but to reinterpret the things with the reality of the technology, with the reality of the context of use, and with the development, the rapid development of the technology.
Thank you all so much. So I have a follow-up question for you, which is broadly the question of what are the next steps? What are the new issues we need to tackle? And as you're thinking about that, I've heard already earlier today and in this panel, two possible suggestions, not so much at the substance of the question, but perhaps at the way of looking at it. So this question of coordination, of duplication of effort and trying to converge has come up a number of times. And that's part of why we have all of you here together, is to reflect upon that. So that's one thing that I've understood as a sense from you and other speakers in the group, that maybe it's time to try to pull this together for consistency and reducing confusion and reducing duplication of effort. But I think I also heard a need to move from sort of the general and abstract to the contextual and specific. How does this play out with this technology in this context? So we need to move to scenarios. We need to move beyond the broad and general to the concrete. So those two things, and I think they can be usefully thought of together, because as I was sort of reflecting here as you were speaking, is there a risk that if we move now to converging approach, continuing at the high level, we are missing what's beneficial about a more grassroots sort of inductive or bottom-up approach? Because we talked about how there's various organizations in getting involved from a labor perspective. We're talking about now the World Health Organization is going to do something. And I was at a meeting last week of the Canadian Privacy Commissioners, and they were telling me that the Global Privacy Assembly, which is an international group of privacy and data commissioners, are all getting together and they're going to do something. And IEEE, from a professional perspective, has its neuroethics framework. So this ferment of production of more detailed, more domain-specific documents might actually be a good thing that would help the initiative toward being more specific and contextual. So if we say, no, you guys quit that, I don't take you to be saying that, but someone could say, okay, well, we're getting too many frameworks. Maybe the question is, okay, we need harmonization at one level, but we need to also have that proliferating granular discussion also happening at the same time. So we're not saying everybody quit and we do one thing, but operating at different levels. So anyway, that's just a reflection on what I've heard. Let me return to the question to you about what are the next steps, and are there any new questions on the horizon from your perspective that we need to tackle? And you can answer it sort of as a topic, but also as a reflection on the way forward and who speaks and on what and that sort of thing.
Thanks.
Oh, we'll start at the end so you don't have to go back. Go ahead. Yeah.
Just a quick answer, because you need articulation, because you need we all of us, we are doing various aspects of the work, and we need to not only to harmonize, to combine, but to articulate, because all these things are needed. We absolutely need experts to be able to know from what we are speaking about and to dig into the real things. You are not going to take a lay people and ask a complex question. You need experts, but you need a multifaceted group of experts to bring all together the question. And then at the other part, and Laurence will speak better than me on this, because the Council of Europe produced a wonderful document. You need engagement. and you need engagement of the various actors. And you need absolutely that at the what you name granular, which is the basic level, all the people that are or will be concerned by these technologies as they were or they are for fertility, for genetics and other emerging technologies are engaged, and engaged by the right way, from information, literacy, to deliberation and capacity of action. So if you have only expert, you will have wonderful text, but no application. If you have only information, nobody will come. If you have only deliberation, but no result, no outcome, nobody will stay. You need all these steps going together. And one of our challenge is to be able to articulate these specific domains to produce something coherent, something consistent.
Well, actually, I think that the way to be complementary is also to ask yourself, taking into account the panorama, who is doing what, at what moment, what is already available, what you can bring in additions that could be of added value. And that's the way we looked at this neurotechnology perspective. And as Hervé mentioned, the work we've done on public debate and public engagement, this is certainly an area where we have a guide, and we have been promoting that, particularly in relation to technology, not necessarily only neurotech, but we have some bases. And this is one of the acts in which we want to be more active, together with other organizations, trying to promote this public awareness and neurotechnology and facilitate inclusive societal deliberations. I think the idea is that public discourse, and this is one of the outcomes of the roundtable I wanted to mention, that the public discourse is vital in order that innovation is steered in a direction which align with public goals and values. So you need, as you said, to go bottom up, and you need to organize this in a way that is actually also accountable. I think this is very important. It should not be a ticking box exercise. And that is something not easy to get. So that's one of the axes. The other axis is actually the standard setting. I think that, and then we converge a lot with the outcome of the UN report actually in that respect, is that when you talk about multi-level governance, which is one of the outcome of the roundtable, standard setting is included. I mean, standards, we need legal instrument. It's not sufficient. The agility of a governance systems is also through soft law and other mechanism, but you need also legal instrument. And it's important that we are having an ecosystem that is value-based and inclusive. So from that perspective, the Council of Europe looked at the panorama, what we're doing, and one of the things which will now be proposed and hopefully implemented is the idea, which is very much highlighted in the UN report and in the conclusion actually, to look at existing legal standards in human rights and how they could be interpreted to address challenges raised by neurotechnology. So it's a bit of a focus, but as was pointed out, I think that it's an essential focus, because if we don't agree on what is what, how do you can decide it is an abuse? How can you decide it is something that is legitimate or not legitimate? So that's what we want to do next, considering that this would be complementary to what was done and converging also with the objective highlighted both in UNESCO, OECD, as well as the, in particular, UN report. OECD, we already have a basis with Principle 5, in particular in the recommendations to promote this dialogue and public engagements. And now we want to go into more concrete actions jointly. So that was my answer.
Yeah, I could just say I agree. Great. I will, however, add a couple of things. Yeah, we need both. And on the coordination side, I actually think we have already gone a long way in certain areas. You can see it reflected here. I was following the really, really hard work of the expert group at UNESCO, trying to really come up with something good and strong and coherent within a week, essentially. And we try to help with language proposals, for example, to make it coherent with our human rights thinking. There's some tension, like you can see the intentions are the same, but when you come from an ethical background, the language may not always be the same. And trying to come to a common ground there is essential. And I think we have gone a long way, and you have really tried.
We took your recommendations.
No, but I'm grateful for that. And I think we had it in other contexts. I think we all are aware of the discussion. Do we need new rights or not new rights? And there has been over the years a lot of discussion, communication, and then also some understanding, okay, what can get us somewhere now? What are the results we want to see in the real world? So this is happening. And will hopefully continue and become even better. The grassroots element is something that I had very high on my list when I was thinking about what to say here, because actually following the few neurotech related conferences, etc., this seemed to be very much expert driven, and there's clearly, I believe, a need to go to build something from the bottom up, as you say. I mean, there's this really very strong and very telling and very important saying from the disabilities movement: nothing about us without us. And so there's certainly a lot to do, and it will improve the outcomes. On our side, yeah, I agree, like being more detailed now, mapping how rights can be implicated and interpreted is important. We here can certainly get the various mechanisms more on board, treaty bodies to interpret certain rights. We have some reports now, the advisory committee. Very importantly, the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief a couple of years ago had a report where he unpacked the freedom of thought and defined certain categories that is, I think, very helpful as a starting point. And from our side, we can support that. We can also increase our work in that area, and we want to do that with businesses based on our BTEC work.
Thank you. David?
Thanks. So I'm going to address mostly the coordination problem, because I think that's at the center of the panel. I would suggest that there are three concepts to think about in this regard. One would be ecosystem and ecosystemic thinking. This engages articulation, that idea, but also thinks about a kind of multifunctional, multi-layered system, which I think is really important in global governance, which is whatever field you're in. It's exceedingly messy, right? It's overlapping, it's fragmented, it's polycentric, right? That's just the state of global governance. So we're not facing, to some extent, a new problem. We're just facing it in the neurotech space. And I think an ideal for something like governance of emerging tech, with all of this diverse terrain, fragmentation, overlapping, is to try to imagine and articulate a kind of ecosystem approach where there are multiple functions, there are multiple audiences, there are multiple constituencies. A second idea is addition. And I think this gets at, Jennifer, your point about whether bottom-up modalities are a way towards being an additive process rather than a conflictual process. And I would agree. I think that addition can happen um, by nesting levels. And I think the charter, the French charter, is a really nice example of how the OECD sets a kind of framework, but it's not a rigid framework. It's not a overly legalistic framework. It sets out some guiding ideas and a structure, and it encourages countries to implement in the way that they think comports with this framework. And I think it took a very interesting substantiation in France, in particular, fewer concepts, and, different kinds of actors explicitly contemplated, and suitable for the French context. So I think we can be thinking about level carefully in terms of addition, as well as this, I think, layer of guidance. And I think I would make a distinction between the point about grassroots and non-experts, and a point which I think you were making, Jennifer, which is about specific guidance. So, which is sort of a question of specificity of and sort of a playing out of the details of how you actually implement something. If you're talking about really good ideas of which actors should do what in which context, it may not matter whether you phrase the overarching value exactly the same. And so there might be a robust opportunity for addition through the specification of guidance. And I should say the OECD this year launched a toolkit that tries to give specific ideas for how to implement some of the recommendations that are developed. But I could see this being very consistent with other toolkits that are developed. What we don't do is a context by context toolkit, but I think you could do that. Labor, education, and this would be consistent with and additive. And finally, I think another opportunity is an iteration. So there's a nice way in which the OECD and the Council of Europe have kind of had a go. And I think the UNESCO has learned from that, and I think has seen gaps and has seen where certain aspects need to be more developed, more set in a slightly different, human rights framework. But the OECD recommendation will be revised this year or next year. This is an opportunity to build on what UNESCO has been doing and perhaps bring out elements that are complementary. And so this iterative aspect can also do some of this work of producing complementarity.
Thank you all. That was really extremely interesting. Thanks. So I actually have another question, but I'm going to hold off because I want to actually hear some reactions from all of you. What are you thinking about all of this? What questions would you pose to representatives of these groups doing this work? I'm going to steal one of these microphones and we'll share them. And Christophe can be the runner. So please let us know your thoughts.
Thank you very much for all these insights were definitely very interesting. I would like to pose a question on the regional systems and what can be the role of the human rights regional systems in this process, because of course we want universal standards, but at the same time we have the Council of Europe and the European Court of Human Rights that are definitely an instrument, but also the Inter-American Convention. So is there a danger of having a development through regional systems, and what can be the role of them? Thank you.
So the question about regions is sort of international approaches. Anybody want to start?
Maybe I can answer, not you will answer, Tim, but I will try to answer from the experience we had at UNESCO from the COVID and from the 4 recommendations we published during the COVID time. We had meetings at the various regional levels to promote the, the, the visibility of the recommendation, but also to hear about. And we were speaking of articulation. This is an essential articulation. And during the process of the drafting of the present recommendation on neurotechnology at UNESCO, we made several regional deliberations. Marcello and EPFL organized one for the European level. And it was extremely important to have the feedback of all these. At the end, it was making more than 1,000 pages for all these consultations, but because there were 27. But this is incredibly rich and needed. So we absolutely need this as the moment of articulation.
Okay, I think that it should not be a danger first. I think also we could see this regional and global level as a sort of a step-by-step approach. It's certainly easier to have discussions with a more limited number of states, which could actually make a step forward. And it does not prevent from inviting and including non-European states. And actually, this is the case already. We have some non-European states participating in our work. So I see this more as a sort of a step-by-step approach. And again, I think we all have the concerns not having too speed or of contradictions. But again, it proves in many different legal areas that regional levels can actually help to make a sort of a first step forward. I don't know whether my neighbor would agree on this, but that's the way I would see this. And at least I would think important to make sure that is the way it is done and not in contradiction. When it comes to judiciaries, that's another issue in terms of interpretation. And I think it is also a level where we may have some concerns, but it's also the independence of the judiciaries that is at stake there. So the more we could get agreement, and I think it's interesting, for example, to see that the European Court of Human Rights is using international legal instruments outside the Convention on Human Rights to interpret the Convention on Human Rights, because they actually think that those legal instruments reflect an agreement. So I think that's in that sense, we aim at going in the same directions and hope no oppositions. But the more we clarified the terminology, the easier it's going to be, I think.
Yeah, thanks. No, I fully agree, and the regional systems are essential, and we have complementarity between the international level, the regional level, and they're essential in moving things forward that will be often much harder to achieve at a global level, where the political environment is far more complex. And just to give examples of where we had developments like Convention 108, the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime, started as regional instruments, but have now, yeah, far broader reached. Exactly. The Budapest Convention now, I think, over 70 member states, etc. So, no, there are always, of course, certain risks, if you want to put it that way, of some contradictions, different approaches. That's part of a dynamic system, but we certainly need the regional systems to do their work there. Thank you.
You want to say? Okay. Other questions or comments from the group? Yep.
Thanks, Chris. And if you want to ask a question, we can reverse roles and I'll go around with the mic. So I just wanted to thank again the panel for this fantastic discussion. And it's really great to see you sit next to each other, because I think we really need this kind of synergies for near tech governance. But I wanted to ask a question about one point that was mentioned both by Laurence and David. You used the language of multi-level governance, right? And of course, we have many levels, probably starting from the most fundamental, which is fundamental rights, but then we build on that, and there are many levels of governance. But then this kind of triggers the question of how do we translate one level into the other. So how we establish the necessary translations of normative instrument at one fundamental level to another level, and so on. So I recall the OECD at some point used the language of translational governance. So maybe if you could say a few words about that. And the second question, which is kind of connected, regards the problem of democratic accountability. So your organizations have been working a lot with experts, and it was a privilege for me and many people in this room to contribute to that debate. But then, of course, this is it's subject to the potential criticism of being kind of technocratic approach to science and technology policy. And now that the field of neurotechnology is having increased visibility in the public, how do you think we can complement these approaches with kind of grassroots approaches that are mindful of democratic accountability? So thank you.
Two very easy questions. Let's start backwards and talk about the role of the public or broader citizens or the demos in the production of governance around emerging technologies. And each of our organizations are a different mode of governance, a different modality. And I think you can just work directly from democratic theory to understand the importance of engagement of the governed in the development of the rules that govern us. So, and that applies even if it's a soft law system, because we know soft law also exerts has certain kinds of authority. I think, being totally honest, I think this is a sore spot. Well, I think it's a sore spot for many international organizations because they tend to work on a kind of rarefied, high level perspective. And I would at least say that that's the case for OECD, sort of having working from the inside there. Nevertheless, there are, I think, some mechanisms that exist, but that need to be thought out and improved around involving civil society through representatives in the process of commenting on instruments, through public comment periods, which is a classic mechanism of accountability that you find in national contexts. I think it's problematic in an international context, more problematic in the removal, the distance between individuals and citizens and an international standard can be gaping. So let's think about these mechanisms and let's agree to do better, and let's not claim too much authority as kind of formal legal status. I think, at least for recommendations and this sort of thing, we can't claim that this is democratically enacted law. What we can claim is that certain member countries came together to say these are important standards that should be, we think, by moral and political force, be implemented in their own way in the countries. On translation, I think I tried to get at that in the last comment, that that we need to be both careful, strive for translation in terms of articulation or in terms of an ecosystem approach, but that there are very difficult problems around not only level of governance, national to international, but also issues of formality and levels of formality of binding law versus softer law, as well as issues of specificity versus generality. These are all domains and dimensions that require translation. So let's think about it together.
So I'll follow the same order then when it comes to engagement. It's interesting to see that when the drafter of the Convention on Human Rights and Biomedicine in the 19th start working on this, they make it a requirement actually already for member states to promote public debate on those issues. And in May last year, the ministerial conference in Reykjavik of the Council of Europe, all the Minister of Foreign Affairs, gave as a priority this public engagement again. So it means practically at the Council of Europe that the way the CDBio has started working now, it's becoming a sort of a policy within the organizations. So we do certain things, such as systematic public consultation on any legal instrument, involving civil society representative. For example, we've been working on mental health issue and human rights, and we have organization representing disability persons participating in all sessions at intergovernmental level of the development of legal instrument. We have organized a pilot youth forum, and now we have this youth perspective that is integrated into the work of the Council of Europe. And we have this pilot youth forum, but it's good to have those steps, but it's still not enough, we think. First, because whether you have, for example, I'll take the youth forum, the young people who participated, are they really representative of the young people in the different member states? I really doubt about this. So I think one of the efforts, and this is one of the things we're thinking in terms of, in the context of the new strategic action plan, and how we can make sure that at the national level, already what comes back from delegation reflect also debate with an engagement with the society. So we have different level, and we want at each level to be able to promote that debate so that at the end, we could reflect more precisely what comes from the civil society as such. It's not the panacea. I think this is a challenge in all country, and within the 46 member states of the Council of Europe country, where this is already embedded in the democratic process. In other country, this is not even a question. They don't even think of asking the opinion of the society on certain issues. So we have these differences. We have developed the guide on public debate to try to help member states. We have actually given example of practices, not necessarily adopted at national level, but local level, but could be also of good practices. So we are working on promoting that, but it's still sort of a ambition and ultimate goal, but it's not reached yet. And when it comes to the transversality, I think that what we see at the Council of Europe is that the work we do is really on values and the fundamental element. And then you are going down to more precise guidance. And this is where working with all stakeholders is really important. But I don't think we necessarily have the solution only at that level. It will also go down to the national level. But certainly neurotechnology is an example where it's not only engagement with the civil society, it's engagement with all the stakeholders. And maybe getting a bit outside the box, because we used to work a lot with the people in the biomedical field, but now we have new actors and we need to take them on board. And I think this is also a new way of working for the Council of Europe itself and for the Intergovernmental Committee. We had a first step with the roundtable where we try to have this balance, but we need to get more systematically engaged with all stakeholders and create this dynamic of discussions with developers, policymakers, and so on in this context.
Okay, I think we have another question. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have a small question, but first I wanted to thank you for the great work you are doing in addressing these issues, which is having a great impact in Latin America. My question is about the relationship between academic and political disagreement. So innovative ideas will be always controversial, such as a new neural rights framework, cognitive liberty, and so on. But they could be good. So any room in your organizations for within or between organizations agreement of incorporating some of these innovative ideas, such as the notion of cognitive liberty or any other neural right, despite the possibility that there will never be agreement regarding this in academia or in scientific discussions?
If,
Go ahead.
if I may comment, first, we are from the academia at the level of expert groups. So we are discussing this point. And then if you return to the IBC report 2020 from UNESCO 2021, you see the whole discussion about neural right. And our conclusion, which is the conclusion of 36 experts coming from everywhere in the world, academics from legal field, academics from the more exact science or physical science field, was to say, okay, you have a corpus of questions that clearly need to be packed as human rights. But the same way you have reproductive rights or rights for some women, but no new right. Freedom of thought is a right. Mental integrity is a right. Human dignity. And then you have applications of these rights. And clearly it comes to something extremely sensitive when it comes to our nervous system, particularly to our brain, what we name neural right, to mimic what was done for reproductive right. But the same way for reproductive right, you have the right to access contraceptions or access to abortions, but also the right to access fertility treatments to have a baby. The same way you need to have integrity of your brain as an organ, integrity of your mind, and the possibility to continue. But then will come the context. And to be clear, and in my field, if you take a Parkinson patient, and after a while, you give dopamine, precursor of dopamine, you release the movement, but after a few years, you have on-off moments. And when people are off, they are blocked on the motor aspect. So they are fully rigid, not able to do one movement. But worse, when they are in this condition, they are not even able to think, because the dopamine is also needed to help the movements of thinking. When you release them, for example, with implants, you recover movement and you recover their freedom of thought. So in this context, human dignity is to restore freedom of thought. What we want to prevent is the use of some neurotechnology, whatever is a kind of invasive or non-invasive technology, to influence you. Just take an example. Now it's more and more possible to describe from a basic neuroscience point of view the circuit of confidence, how you trust or distrust in one proposal. Imagine that tomorrow you have a device, just airbags, that are able to detect the level of confidence you have in a given information or in a given product. And that could bring some advertisement on some people to try to influence you and monitor on the screen the level of confidence. And if you raise the confidence, this is clearly an infringement to freedom of thought, because you can trust or distrust what you want. And we don't want these technologies to be used to monitor your level of confidence. So you see, all these rights are fundamental and need to be kept. But the way technology is going to challenge step by step and context by context, these rights, the way that the data are going to be collected the inference of this data. Just another example, because it's now in every car, at least in Europe, which is not considered by some as neurotechnology. Eye tracking to monitor your level of vigilance in your car, and ring a buzzer if you get to sleep. So when you get to sleep, your saccades are getting slower. So, okay, it's a device to help you getting awake and prevent car accident. Wonderful as a security system. But now, in every car, you have a computer. And so the data are going to be collected. And what about delivering the information to your insurer and changing your premium? You see, you are challenging your rights. And we change. We are no more in Switzerland. We are in Singapore. Most likely the police would like to have an access to your car computer to prevent some car accident because it's public health. And now it's another infringement to freedom, public liberties, and things like that. So you see, it's exactly the same technology. It's exactly the same inference about your state of vigilance, but three different access to the data, three different use, and three different political choices.
Well, I think you should not be too concerned because the first reality is that as soon as an intergovernmental committee starts thinking about this, it calls upon academic knowledge. And if you look at Marcelo, I could mention also Roberto Adorno, who drafted a recent report for us, analyzing the existing human rights framework. So those ideas are really reaching the intergovernmental level without any doubts. I think the question on when you talk about innovation as new human right, the new neuro right, I think the question is more: are you talking about a concept or actually legal aspect of it? And so the question in the roundtable was really: are we really missing rights in the legal framework, or are we missing legal provision that explain that those rights should be interpreted that way with regard to neurotechnology? So that's so. I don't know whether it's reassuring, but I think that in terms of taking account innovative ID, it's already there.
So I think I think the question of expertise in these processes is a fundamental problem. So I think you've put your finger on it. And I think the way we have solved that is to say there's a boundary between experts and technical knowledge and the politicians or policymakers who are political. But if you look at the studies and science and technology studies and other studies of expertise, you understand that there's a lot of, it's a lot more cloudy than that. That work of expert groups becomes normative very quickly when you talk about who thinks that a right applies or not applies. Okay, unless you're extremely positivistic in terms of how you view the law, there's going to be normative judgment that comes in. So the question is, how do you balance, how do you handle experts within these political, legalistic processes? That is a problem. I think we have to acknowledge that that's a problem that has to be managed. If experts exert too much influence in dictating law, they become or ruled by Platonic guardians, right? It's a technocracy. If it's politically controlled without listening to experts, we're living basically in a governance that's unfounded in fact or knowledge, isn't based on best knowledge. So how do we structure this? I think we need to be transparent about how we appoint experts. I think we need to be careful about writing our scopes of work. I think we need to think carefully about whether there should be a consensus structure or whether we should allow minority opinions to acknowledge that there can be disagreement among experts. And nevertheless, this can be very useful in political process. So I think you put your finger on a question and we should be thinking critically about that.
Yes, please. Yeah.
If you want to respond.
No, I just have an added an element, but Yeah, I just think also this question of expertise is also extremely important in the context of citizen engagement and public dialogue. So I don't want to elaborate on this, but I think this is also a very big issue. And it tends to be what is sometimes called public engagement is actually more like experts are explaining you what you should be thinking. And if you're not thinking the same way, it's just because you don't understand. And that is also an issue.
Yeah, and to add another angle from our perspective, we have a quite dynamic system with many actors. I mentioned, well, there's us, we write reports, we advise states, etc. We build on experts we work with, we read, etc. We have stakeholder consultations, constant stakeholder engagement is kind of, we try to have it in our DNA, and it's so much ingrained in human rights thinking, but we're also an institution with limitations, so we certainly can always improve. But then we have also these special procedures I mentioned, or we have the advisory committee, which are partly removed from the political side, right? The appointment process is not entirely free of it, but then there is an independence of the systems. They explore new ideas in their own capacity. They present it to states. They present it publicly. This can get traction. Government delegations themselves come, of course, also with their own expertise that builds on technical expertise, ideally. So we have a very complex system, and it's certainly not always perfect, but we have many, many layers. On the question of rights and the interpretation of rights, you gave some examples, and one that occurred to me was the discussion we had for a long time about access to the internet as a human right. And there have been very vocal, very strong voices saying it needs to be recognized as a human right. But what happened, and what's a very logical thing is, yes, you could, of course, try to negotiate now a treaty to delineate that exact right. Theoretically possible, you would probably not achieve that much, and it is already, you can derive it, and that's what's been done from many other rights, freedom of expression, like the obligation to promote access to information, to promote freedom of expression, is in an age where so much of communications depend on the internet, means, well, you need to promote access to the internet. So these things evolve, and it's part of how law operates, I think, on every level.
So I think we have time for one more question, I think. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
so I'm the lucky one
Oh,
with long answers. Short question. So countries and states don't wait until you guys get your things together. So they legislate already now on your technology. Chile, Mexico, Spain, Scotland, Colorado, California, they have gone ahead. So how do you integrate these facts, these legislation? How do you integrate that in your work, in your ongoing work?
Yeah, of course, the world happens, and that's a good thing. Like, we are not the government of the world. We follow, we try to monitor these things, to be inspired by that, see what models can maybe be replicated. We give recommendations. Yeah, it's part of the very, it's a multifaceted work we are doing. Sometimes, I'm not talking about this specific legal effort, we will say, well, what you're doing, that contravenes certain principles, certain rights. In other contexts, we will say, oh, this is great. we fully endorse that, and maybe this is something we can take to the next level. That would be my very simple answer to that.
Well, at least practically, you see those delegations which have already taken a step forwards coming with this proposal in the discussions when we are developing instrument. But I think that the international, I mean, at least the regional level, I should say, for us is aimed at defining a framework within which all countries can develop their own legislation. And from a human rights perspective, you could always go further for the protection of human rights. So this essential framework, we benefit from the expertise, the experience, I would say, of those countries having already discussed that. And this is actually put on the tables and for discussion with all the other member states. So I think it comes into place as an experience, and we so far never faced the situations where it's incompatible with all those fundamental principles. So it's more like a basis, and it's used as a basis rather than as something which may be contradictory or problematic, at least in our field so far.
If I can just add a word among among my various hats for 15 years, I've been in the advisory council for science and technology of our parliament, and the national assemblies, for example, in Europe, they have these scientific advisors, which explain why in the French law, for example, you have the already brain imaging with regulation for scientific, medical, and judiciary use as soon as 2008, because the questions were already arriving. It was not named neurotechnology at that time, but the use of brain imaging in the judiciary, for example, for elderly people that are under the influence of some people, whereas there are some neurodegenerative disorders, or on the contrary, people arguing that they did some crime, but it was an epilepsy crisis, or they were not responsible for it. So you have the maturation of the technology, which makes some states to bring in their own legislation some regulations. But very often it's either minimal or covering a very specific thing. For example, why covering only brain imaging? Now we would like to cover brain activity, which would be much more of importance. And in this consideration, now international bodies, because they are producing new proposals, they are also so by either courts, high courts, or by the legislator, by the parliament, and it allow to implement the law. It goes that way, and from the best of my knowledge, Chile really adopted the law, but in Mexico it was not only a proposal and it was not adopted yet.
And I'd also mention, just further to that, your reference to France having early legislation in 2008. There's actually courts that have looked at these questions quite some time ago. I'm thinking in particular the Indian Supreme Court looking at forensic use of EEG in the criminal justice system. The Supreme Court discussed mental privacy and the issues within the Indian constitution in 2010. So we can look also to those legal resources, not just sort of legislation, but judicial interpretations. So I want to, I hope you'll join me in thanking our speakers for this rich discussion, and I hope we have another one. I think this is something that's going to evolve. We're all learning as we go through it in real time. Thank you very much for the insights and for being here. We're very grateful. Thank you.